the demo phase of a song is such a beautiful place because it is untapped potential, and your imagination is so engaged, and that creative process is so rich and engaged because you're like, this could be anything. Like, it could be anything. I could add this stuff, or I could add that stuff. And then it comes down to, I need to put it out. That's where stuff can get a little scary for an artist, because then you're going like, this is the guitar part, like this is the drum part, that fill is the drum fill, you know, that bass line is the bass line. I think the way that you don't get caught up in it, I mean, this sounds like so basic. I just feel like you have to be brave.
Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. We're matching today.
We literally.
I called you and I was like, "What you wearing, bro?"
I think it's like,
yeah, it's like it's almost it's so close.
I go put on my tan pants too.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to have a conversation with you. Excited to talk about all different kinds of stuff, from you as an artist to your work and different things that you do. But maybe we could just start with, you just released a new EP.
Mm-hmm.
It's got 4 songs on it.
4 songs.
2 that you had previously released as singles.
As singles.
And 2 new ones.
Yeah.
Maybe walk us through just kind of like the story behind maybe a few of the songs, or maybe your favorite one from the EP.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been like a 2-year project, which is a ridiculous, but also like I just accept the fact that that's what my life is like. And it's like, yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. That took 2 years. But yeah, half the songs were like really old ones. The opening track, the EP is called Rocks in the Rain, and the opening track called Spiders is like almost an 8-year-old song.
Oh, wow.
And that song kind of like jump started this EP as like, oh, hey, I'm going to do an EP. I had kind of taken like a couple years of just not really doing music. Just like some stuff happened in my life that like made me really not want to do music anymore. And when COVID happened, I had before the shutdown, I had started like remodeling my basement to make a studio, because I was like, I actually want to get back into recording again, and I really want to do this and have a space. And I had started picked up writing again, and COVID shut down, and I actually just like had a space ready to work from home, which was incredible. I started like messing around with making some tracks at home, and I had a little studio in my previous house, so I'm like, this is gonna be like, I had called it the Space Cave. So this was wow, words is hard. This was Space Cave 2.0, and I was very excited. So I started a little YouTube channel, because like, you know, COVID happened and everybody started a YouTube channel, and so I was like, might as well. The whole point of it was just like, I want to have something to like kind of force me to make music and to like document it. And so I was like getting my space like dialed in and like recording and kind of putting out some like little videos here and there. And I was just having fun with it. Like I had no real plans, like, oh, maybe I'll put a single or 2 out from this. And then I ended up like seeing this band. My wife's a florist, and so she was doing this wedding, and like the wedding band was like actually just a band, like a rock band from Chicago. And I wish I could remember. Oh, they're called Rookie. I think that's their name. And it was just like I was listening to them, and I was like, man, this is just cool. Like, you know, it's like you listen to something and it just gets you fired up. Yeah. And I was like, I'm gonna go home and record some stuff. And so I went home, I set up an AEA ribbon mic like on the floor and sat down, and I had the like day before I was like scrolling through my my voice memos app, because I just have just tons of just snippets of ideas. Some are fully formed, some are like me nonsense mumbling melodies. There's like random jokes and stuff. There's just so much stuff in there. And I was scrolling through and I found Spiders, and I listened to it, and I was like, this doesn't suck. Like, this is actually pretty cool. And I remember I wrote that song. I'd written it 8 years ago. I was going through a phase where I was taking like 15 minutes a day and trying to write a song in 15 minutes, like a 15-minute songwriting challenge. And that was one of the songs that came out of it. And it was one of those, the song is about a real thing that actually happened. Like, I had a very strange dream. I woke up in the morning, just the residue of that like weird ethereal spooky dream feeling was still there, and I just kind of got up and was walking around my house, went downstairs to grab my guitar, I think, just because I was like, I'm going to write now because I feel weird, and that's a good time to write. And there were spiders on the floor, and the doorway in the there's a line that's like something like a memory is watching me from the door, and like the door to the basement in my old house in Space Cave 1 was like haunted. It would close and it would squeak and it would go I walked down one time and the door squeaked behind me and it went da 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 da, like note for note. It was so creepy.
Bro.
It scared me. So I was like, that door's haunted. So that was like kind of in my consciousness when I was like writing that. Anyway, long story short, like I sat down 15 minutes, knocked that out, and I was like, I don't know, this one seems kind of weird. I don't know what to do with it, and kind of left it in my voice memos, and it just sat there. And then 8 years later, I found it, and I was like, I'm going to learn how to play that again, and tracked it. I played the demo for my wife, and she said, this sounds like the most you thing I've ever heard you record. And that was like my wife's a real good gauge for like, I don't know, I really respect her opinion. And so I was like, oh, okay. Like, I want to take this seriously and I want to finish this song. And that kind of led me to go, do I have anything else that feels like this, or that feels like it would go with this sort of cohesive tone, like with the acoustic guitar and like kind of the Americana vibes. And so yeah, then I went back through just kind of like my catalog. I found the second or third, no, it's the third track on Rocks in the Rain is called Small Town Pride. And that was one, again, like I had that for 7 years or something like that. And I was like, okay, cool. I have that one. I'm going to put that one on there. And then Hey Kid and Rocks in the Rain were like newer additions, like ones I had written. And actually, I had written those like sort of after I was like, maybe I will put together an EP.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of like, I don't think I like necessarily meant to pursue an EP. It just, I started collecting songs and going back through my, voice memos and notes and stuff. And I was like, all right, cool, let's just do this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how the project kind of got its feet.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When you think back to, years ago when you were doing like the discipline of like 15 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Like, what would you say you saw as some of the benefits to like creating that habit, even if it was for a short period of time,
Yeah. You can't overthink. You have to just move. And so I would, like, from start to finish, like guitar, I wouldn't bring anything that had been previously written to those 15-minute songwriting sessions. It was actually a friend of mine like suggested like, hey, like we should all do this or whatever. And so I was like, okay. And really for like a month or so I did it. But yeah, I think the biggest thing I took from it was like just loosening your judgment and making moves and like not overthinking.
Yeah.
When you have all the time in the world, you also have all the time in the world to rip apart what it is you're doing. And I would say a lot of times that's not the best. Sometimes you are your own worst critic. I mean, like, case in point, Spiders was a song that I finished writing and I was like, this is weird, I don't know what to do with it. And then it sat around for 8 years.
Mm.
And it took that kind of distance for me to have an objective point of, a little bit more of, objective point of view is not really what I want to say. It was just more like a fresh point of view.
Yeah.
Like almost more like I was listening to it as a producer and not the person who wrote it.
Yeah.
Which is a tough place to get to, because when you're writing music, you're so like, you're so entrenched in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely the ability to loosen your judgment, to like move fast, to like kind of suck at, like, I mean, I wrote a lot of stuff that I was like, nope, that won't see the light of day. And I think even that act is like good, because it kind of trains your brain, like, I survived a bad idea. I think for somebody, like, I don't know if you relate with this, but sometimes it's like just like the fear of maybe having a bad idea.
Yep.
You're like, I don't know if I want to go through that. And then you do, and you're like, I survived. And then you kind of train yourself to go like, we can have bad ideas and be okay. You know?
It is kind of like a dichotomy, because it's like a lot of people don't start, honestly, or don't release stuff, or don't whatever, because they're worried about, you know, how it's going to be perceived by others typically.
Sure.
And I feel like that's the big thing that holds a lot of people back insecurity wise, is not just like ourselves, but like, what are other people going to think that like I released this and it's not like great, or they don't think it's great, but totally. Whatever. But yeah, it definitely is like an interesting thing, in the sense of like, the truth is, you can't really even know what is good until you've made bad.
Right.
Like,
well,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really true. And I think you also can't know what's good until you put something out and you no longer have control over it anymore. I think that's been like such a huge thing I've learned, is like, even down to like just releasing a single is such a great way to like put something out and then be able to then have a moment of like have a retrospective time and like look at it, and like, you know, like my first 2 singles I put out, like they're on the EP, but I like really didn't like the single covers like after a few months. And like, I don't feel broken up about the fact that I'm like, I don't really like these single covers anymore. What is actually exciting is like, now I have way more of a grid of what I want. And when I put the EP out, I feel like that was closer to what I want. And maybe in like a month or 2, I'll even look at the EP artwork, or I'll listen to some parts of the songs and I'll be like, I want to do that a little different. But it's really hard to know that until you put whatever you're working on, whether it's like a YouTube video or a song, it's so hard to know how to grow unless you put it out and then you don't have control over it anymore. I find that like has been like very hard, but like it's like a hard reality. But I'm sure like you've done more than 10 episodes of this, recorded them anyway, and like I'm sure every time you do it, you're like, oh, I've learned, like, even if it's like 1% more, that's huge. Yeah. So yeah, there's just, you can't substitute like actually just putting things out in the wild. Yeah. And learning from that. And even not necessarily what others have to say about it, like how you, like putting it out and then taking a step back, maybe not looking at it for a little bit, take a week off, don't look at it, don't think about it, and then come back. And sometimes 2 things will happen. You'll go, that's not as bad as I thought it was, and I want to do this thing differently, which is a way more generous feeling than, you know, just kind of like, I don't know, I think it's extremely useful. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the key though, is like putting it out there, releasing it, whatever it is, whether it's music or art or a video, whatever, not caring too much necessarily about other people's necessarily feedback, but like that's kind of a skill in being able to like assess something on your own. Like, how do you judge your own work in a way that's not, you know, where you're not overly judging yourself or you're too hard on yourself or whatever, but like in a way that's like, hey, you know, I've found that like a lot of younger creators really struggle with like that concept of how do I judge something on my own and
Right.
not just let what other people are saying about it, good or bad.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know, be
yeah.
like the guiding light.
Yes. No, that's tricky. And I think I don't, again, like, I think this depends on where you're at. Like, I don't really like, especially advice in like the creative field is so tricky because it's like, I don't know where you're at, so I don't know what you need. Like, you know, I heard the guy, he does Scary Pockets, Jack Conte, I think is his name. He said this thing was like, I only like to give advice that is about what I'm going through, and because I could tell you to be more confident, and that might be the last thing that you need is to be more confident. Like, you actually might need to chill out. So like, I say this with a, like, you know, taking this with a grain of salt for like myself. I think something I've learned from that dynamic of taking feedback, learning, and then learning how to judge your own art. I think that there are two aspects. One is like, I found that asking others for feedback is not necessarily about like what it's not necessarily about like the specific thing they're going to be like, oh, you should do this thing. It's more like weighing somebody else's idea against your instinct. So like, you know, like, okay, let's go back to like, okay, let's say you're putting out a song, you're making single artwork and by yourself, and you're like, I don't know what single artwork is anymore. I've stared at this thing for hours, which is a thing that happens to me. And, you know, you go like, hey, person I trust who knows me and whose opinion I respect, what do you think about this? And if they go, that looks great, and you go, I still don't like it, then it's not, don't do it. Like, it means like, even with the approval of another human, you don't like it. That means you really don't like the idea. Like, I showed my wife several versions of artwork, and she was like, I like that one a lot. That one's it. You should go with that one. And I'm like, I don't, even with your like approval, I don't like it. So I'm not going to use that one because I think I would be betraying something in me that that I would regret. And so I think that there's times where it's like, it's not necessarily, it's funny because it sort of feels like this, you know, like confirmation bias, like sort of thing where you're like, I'm kind of asking a question to like get an answer I already know about. But I think it's more about like testing your own instinct. Like what is it about what you're making that you really, really care about? And what is it that you actually may not have enough perspective on?
Yeah.
Because like on the flip side, you know, Zane Callister, who you had on the podcast, amazing guy. I love that guy so much. He mixed this project, and there were a lot of things that he brought to the table that, especially on Spiders, like arrangement wise, that I didn't have the perspective to think about because I had truly taken the project as far as I could. And so, you know, he sent me a mix and the drums were like rearranged and he had like chopped them up, and I was like, what have you done to my song? And then like I listened to it a couple more times and I was like, that is actually such a great move. And I'm really glad that you did that because I didn't have the perspective to do that. So like I tell both of those stories to just illustrate that like other people's opinions and other people's input on your artwork can have as much or as little influence as you want to. And like I'll kind of like let it like just like challenge what you value. And if you're getting approval, which is like all artists are like, please, somebody tell me what I'm doing is good. If someone's like, that's so great, I love it, and you're still like, I don't know, like sit with that for a couple days and decide, like, is it because I'm being too hard on myself, or is it because like I actually am like, no, on principle, I don't want to do that idea. But again, it's just like, I think that's the mystery of making things.
Yeah.
Like the actual part that I love about it is that it's mysterious. It's like mysterious and normal at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like how the sausage is made is like kind of like whatever, but it's also like, yeah, how do they make sausage?
I was actually asking
Like,
that question. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
No, that's good. How do you not get stuck in that though? Because I think a lot of people maybe err so far on the side of, you know, getting feedback and and whatever. Like, how do you create, get feedback, reiterate, release, reiterate? I mean, like, how do you find like some kind of rhythm in that versus just like holding on to things and never releasing them because they never feel ready? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think it's accepting the fact that it will never feel ready. Like, and I don't say that to be like a downer. I think that's actually a really freeing concept to like grab onto. It's like, we can fall in love with like I'll just speak in music terms, like in the demo phase. Like you can be so like caught up in the, like Jeff Tweedy in his book How to Write One. Oh no, it was his memoir. He talked about how, maybe it was How to Write One Song. Either way, it's in one of Jeff Tweedy's books. They're both good. Read them both. I highly recommend both of them. But he talked about how, you know, the demo phase of a song is such a beautiful place because it is untapped potential. It's kind of like I explained it this way to somebody the other day. Like, remember old video games you used to play, and in your mind you fill in all the gaps, and you're like, man, all the graphics were so good, and then you watch a YouTube video of it, and you're like, that looks like garbage. Like, that's sort of how I feel about it, in that, like, in the demo phase, it's still kind of pixely, and your imagination is so engaged, and that creative process is so rich and engaged because you're like, this could be anything. Like, it could be anything. I could add this stuff, or I could add that stuff, and then it comes down to, I need to put it out, and so then you start making final movements. That's where stuff can get a little scary for an artist, because then you're going like, this is the guitar part, like this is the drum part, that fill is the drum fill, you know, that bass line is the bass line. And like, you know, that part can feel a little disillusioning, because then you start getting into mixing, you start being over analytical and start hearing things that nobody's ever gonna notice or whatever. I mean, there's stuff on this EP where I'm like, I hear this thing and it's weird, but I know no one hears that. I think the way that you don't get caught up in it is that you just have to, I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's so difficult. I think you just, I mean, this sounds like so basic. I just feel like you have to be brave. Like, you just have to be brave. And you have to, like, if you have some good people around you too, who are able to, like, you're able to process that stuff with, and then allow other positive voices in your head. It's not just your own voice. I mean, that was so great about having Zane on the project, about having my wife, and like my friend Addison was like really, really like helpful, and just like the listening and like being able to be like, do you hear that? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, good. I think there's a certain point where you also do just have to like learn to let go a little bit. Because ultimately, like, when you put that music out there, it's not just your baby anymore. You know, it's like other people get to experience it and listen to it, and like, it's kind of just a trust thing. Like, you just have to let go. And it's I think what can help sometimes is to try to not, one thing I did for myself was I tried to not listen to it a ton before I put it out. So like, that's a real practical one. Like, once it was mixed and I approved the mixes, I was like, can't listen to it until it's out, because if I don't want to give myself any space to doubt something I already know is good and will come out, and I'm going to put it out. We're not going to self-sabotage. We're not going to we're not going to do that. And I say we because I do feel like, I think everybody has like an internal, it's like the internal family system in your brain where it's like you have that internal dialogue, I think emphasis on dialogue. You're like talking to yourself. It's you and that other version of yourself that has a lot of opinions and thoughts and gets really freaked out about stuff. And yeah, I think just you have to be brave and you have to be able to just go, like, let it go. And I think, and also like, this isn't gonna be the best thing that you do. And like, that's okay. Like, I know I'm gonna write even better stuff. If you stay kind of in that place of like, I'm only gonna ever put it out until I feel like it's ready, or like I am at my peak or something, it's like, well, that kind of sucks, because then it's like, well, then you put it out and you're done. You peaked. Like, you don't want to peak. So just like give yourself some room to grow. I don't know. I think you just have to have grace for yourself. If you have people to talk to and work through it, that's really helpful. Yeah, I don't know. It's a battle, and I'm currently like putting together music for the next project, and I'm like, how much of what I'm saying right now will I remember? Yeah. Like, once I get into this project. Yeah. Like, I may call you up and I'll be like, hey, what did I say on that? What did I, cause I don't remember. And I don't know, man. I'm nervous to put this project out, but yeah, it's just a struggle, but like letting that struggle be of value to you. Like, don't discount the struggle as this just purely negative thing. Like, it's important because it's informing you know. Yeah, it's having a conversation in another country in another language when you kind of you're not totally fluent, and it's just like, you're just gonna sound kind of dumb, and you gotta just kind of work it out. Like, you just work it out and you'll come out the other end better. It's just, you have to like walk into the grocery store and put the apple on the thing and be like, what's the word for apple? You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just, there's no like shortcut. Yep. You know?
Yeah, it's like embracing that, like, I guess you could use the word cringe.
Yeah. You posted a meme, or, no, it was just a thing. I can't remember. You posted some quote about like everything when it first started, everything's cringe. And it's like, yeah, I think like allowing yourself to feel that and get past it, and like again, that's just the like learning and the feedback. Like, yep. You put a thing out and you listen back to it and you go like, that's not exactly, we're not quite there yet, but here's the next thing. Let's keep working through it. I mean, you listen to like the earliest videos like Taylor Swift ever put out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I may have, I may have thought when I first saw that, like, that girl's not going anywhere. Because it is cringe. It's just, it is what it, and it's just part of the process. It's like, you have to accept the stages. I think the thing that's tricky is like, it's much like, watching a baby learn to walk. Not that watching a baby not like you think, oh, that baby's so cringe, that baby can't walk. Right. But you're like, it's more like the stumbling and the like figuring out the trial and the error. But you're 30-something adult, and you're like, I don't want to feel stupid. I've spent so much of my life trying not to feel stupid, and I'm purposefully putting myself in the situation where I'm forced to like come to terms with the fact that like I am learning in front of people, and that's hard.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about that is like, people aren't thinking nearly as negatively as we probably think they are, No. Like you said, like, it's the same thing with like watching a baby, like it'd be easy for someone to release music and be like, everyone's probably thinking about how that one drum fill sucked, or whatever, and it's like, bro, you're the only one thinking that. Like, you're the only one that's like concerned about that, they're actually just, not everybody, because there are some people who are just negative, but most
Sure.
people are just like, man, congrats, you put something out. You know, they're just like,
Yeah.
they're proud of you or proud to know
Yeah.
you or like, you know, excited for you.
Yeah.
And most people, I find most people are good and for you.
Yeah.
If you're not in that situation, then maybe, you know, work on your environment.
Yeah. Get some new friends.
But typically, like, most people are like, just like, you know, excited for you, and which it seems like it's been cool to see all the people like reposting the EP
Yeah.
and like all the response to the
Yeah.
EP.
The response has been like really heartwarming and like reassuring. Like it's adding another layer of dialogue to like the internal narrative when you're working on stuff, because now I can say, well, they like that, and I don't even feel like I was fully like realized as a artist or whatever when I put those 4 songs out or whatever. So I feel like a little bit braver to do the next one, and maybe even to some degree like let go even more and be like, man, could I get somebody to actually not like what if I like, I don't, you start like think, I don't know, it's just helped my, yeah, it gives you a little bit of bravery. Like you get to go like, oh, like, okay, this was acceptable to the people. And then you go like, well, how far can I push, like, can I push my ideas in ways that are more, can I be more challenging with my ideas, or like, I don't know, like just being okay with not nearly being so internally hard on yourself about that process or whatever. But yeah, it's been super heartwarming. Like the most meaningful response I've gotten was a friend of mine sent a video that he got of his wife dancing to one of my songs. Like she didn't know he was filming, and she was just vibing to the song. And he sent it to me, and you know, she like turns around and is like, are you filming me? And I messaged him back, and I was like, you have no idea what that means to me. Like, I don't get to experience my music as a listener. And that's the closest thing I feel like I have gotten to being able to experience my own music as the listener. And like seeing like, oh wow, that meant something enough to somebody for them to just like just have a vibe sesh with, you know, and just let it go. And like, it's so, I mean, I feel like I make music because I love everything about music. Like, I love making it, I love talking about it, I like thinking about it. And you know, when I listen to something that like really, really speaks to me, like I'm chasing that kind of feeling when I write. And the irony is like, I will never entirely have that because I think that you're too close. But you get like, sometimes you get little glimpses, or you give yourself enough space where like when I got all the tracks back and they were all mixed, I hadn't listened to them for like a month. And, you know, I put my headphones on and was mowing my grass, and I was like, I'm just going to listen to this top to bottom. And I did, and I was like, dang, this is awesome. And then I played it a second time, and I was like, well, you know, there's that one thing. Like, I got like one listen through. That was like all I got. But like, that was, you know, that's like the weird kind of struggle when you're like making, I think for a lot of people, where it's like, you know, people like make movies because they watched movies and those movies made them feel a way. So they're like, I want to create that feeling for somebody. And then you kind of start realizing like, oh, like you kind of get surprised because you're like, wait, I'm not having that feeling. And it's like, well, yeah, it's because you made it, and you know, and you know like how sweaty you were when you recorded those vocals. Like, you know how mad you were when you were doing that guitar part because you got interrupted like 3 times, or like when you were trying to record drums and the kids are running around upstairs and like scraping stools across the floor and it making crazy noise. Like, you're so intimately involved in the process. that it can be hard to like step outside, and you can get moments, but you can't like force that. You kind of, that's what's fun about putting it out, is like you really don't get to experience that listener point of view until you have listeners. And then you can kind of start like going, oh, that's cool, they're having that same experience that I had when I listened to Fill in the Blank Band.
Yep.
Which is, it's awesome. And it's just like recognizing that and accepting that is like the only thing you can do, you know?
It's so good. Why would you say you make music?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like out of all of the like art mediums I could pick, like, I don't know. I mean, I grew up around music. It wasn't like it wasn't like hyper romanticized, like, yeah, and then like we listened to like the Beatles all the time and like Led Zeppelin and like, I mean, it wasn't really like that. Like, it was just like music was always on in the house. Like it was Saturday cleaning day, and like, my dad would turn on Bruce Springsteen or whatever, and like, or just like really good memories attached to music, like driving to the dump with my dad and listening to POD on the way to the dump was just a good memory. And so it's just, music has always been a part of like, I don't know, it just kind of feels like it was always there. It was like it was just like in the buffet of things that, like when you grow up with parents who are, my mom was an art teacher, my mom still is an art teacher, and my dad still is a musician. And when you grow up in that kind of environment, like that's just like kind of what So it's like, well, I'm gonna learn an instrument because my dad plays guitar and plays shows at pizza restaurants and at the bar or whatever, and I'm like I'm gonna learn how to do that because like I just want to, you want to be like your dad. But like I feel like what made me stick with it was like just like there's just so many layers to explore. Like I think similarly with film or whatever, there's just so many layers to it. I love that, like, and with any art form, I just really like the layers and am familiar with the layers of music. Like there's, when you listen to your favorite band, you're not just listening to your favorite band, you're listening to like everything that they've ever listened to. And if you take a second and you like learn about them and you find out like, whoa, like they listen to all this other music, and then you start listening to those bands and you're like, oh, they grabbed this thing from this band and they grabbed this thing from this band, and like that is so fun for me. It feels like such a, I don't know, it like you get to like when you do those deep dives and you start realizing like, oh, your favorite bands were as big of fans of like other bands as you were to them. And you start dissecting like, oh, like Wilco listened to Television, and that's why that guitar tone made it into Wilco's music, and I mean thousands of examples of that. But like, I think that's why I like listening to music and consuming it. It's like I'm not like listening to it. I'm like listening to it and going like, what gets left over? It's like it's like that visual of like you're sifting for gold, and it's like what's going to be left behind after I listen to something. And it could be Taylor Swift. It could be like anything. And I feel like I enjoy lots of different types of music. Just because of the sheer like permission it can give you to try things that are weird or different, or just put you in a space outside of like what you think is possible. It's like the Beatles, like everybody thinks about the Beatles and like kind of like a certain pop, like as like a big pop band, but like Paul McCartney was going, they were all like going to like avant-garde, like noise, like performances, and like going to like events where just people be like whispering in the corner, and it's like that doesn't, like when you think about like the Beatles, like you're like, oh, that doesn't, how did that make it in there? And it's like, well, it did, because when you go see something that is challenging, it makes you go, oh, like I can play outside of the lines a little bit more than I thought I could. Like when, you hear like Yoko Ono, like just kind of howling into a microphone, and like, you're like, that's so challenging as a listener, because you go like, I don't really like it, but the fact that it's being done, like, makes me go like, well, where am I holding myself back somewhere and not being brave and trying something that scares me a little bit? And I mean, I don't know if this answers the question that you asked, but it's just, that's what I think music is just so fun, because of like how deep you can go, and how like I just love listening to it and going like, I don't know what's going to get left over from this, like from this listen through, but like, man, I hope something does. Or and then you'll hear it like pop out later and be like, oh, it's just like learning language. You kind of just you're like, oh, like Beck has a language, and you listen to Beck and you're like, wow, I can't believe he put that guitar tone on that kind of song. I can't believe he has one song where he's like rapping, and then another song that's just like a beautiful acoustic folk song, like that's challenging to my sensibilities, and makes me go like, man, like how can I push myself, you know?
It's good. No, it definitely, gives perspective to you and the way you're thinking about it as you're making music. I think it's really important. And I don't know, I mean, you talk a little bit about like your childhood, like just kind of music was just kind of always around, and obviously with your parents both being artistic, that definitely plays a huge role.
Yeah, totally.
Were your parents like, do you feel like there was like, you have to learn an instrument, or you have to whatever, or like, how do you feel like their role in your life has like played into like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know. I never felt like you have to play an instrument. I feel like I always wanted to, and my relationship with like learning music from my dad, like he was very like hands off unless I asked, and luckily I asked, like, but like it'd be kind of the thing where I would go like, he'd teach me a bunch of chords, and then I'd go off into the wilderness with those chords until I was like, I need something else. And then I'd come back and be like, all right, what else? You'd be like, okay, here's this thing. I'd be like, okay, bye. I'm going to go off into the wilderness again with these 4 other chords or whatever. And that was kind of like the pattern, I guess, or like the way I was educated was like, which makes a lot of sense about a lot of the way that I do things, which is just kind of like, it's like you learn a thing, you like learn enough to get going, and then you like kind of drill that into the ground, and then you go like, well, what else is out there? What other things can I learn? And so same thing with like my mom, like with drawing and stuff. It would be like I would just draw whatever I wanted to, and then like be like, how would I do this? And she'd be like, well, probably like this. Maybe like draw a little sketch and show me like maybe how I could make somebody's leg bend, or make Spider-Man pose in a certain way when I was drawing him or whatever, which was like really, 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 really helpful. I think like that kind of ability to like give me knowledge and then send me out to use it was extremely useful. They probably could have been a little more like, you should practice, like, you know what I mean? But I feel like it all paid off, like in a lot of ways. Like I feel like the ability to just kind of like grab a hold of like a little bit, and like not need to like I mean, you just don't need to know everything right away,
Mm.
you know? And I think for me, like it kind of, that's how I learn. That's how I do things anyway. Like I need to do it and then get the feedback from the project itself so I can decide like, is that actually how I want to do it?
Mm.
I like knowing how it works, and I can kind of step away and go like, all right, cool. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it differently this time or something like that.
Mm.
But yeah.
Yeah, like almost like you need the ability to be able to figure out to some extent on your own.
Yeah, like I think to also, and maybe this is like, I mean, I'm sure this manifests like in as a good trait and maybe a negative one at different times, where it's like I want to know like why, and like I want to know like the context. Like I'm very like I want to know what the context is, and like because if you're just like you should do this thing, I'm like I don't, why though, like, and it's like, well, just trust me. And it's that can be difficult for me, and so it's like I'm like, well, I can't if I don't feel like invested in it. Like if I don't feel personally like very invested in the concept or the idea, I can be a little bit of a bummer to be around in a project, which is something I have to just work on, like personally, to like adapt and be like, yeah, sometimes you just don't know all the details, bro, and you just gotta go with it. But also like knowing that helps me go like, okay, I need a context. So it's like if you were my guitar teacher and you were like, you need to learn how to learn today. I'm gonna teach you how to play an open D tuning. I'd be like, okay, why? It would be like a little bit of a struggle for me to like just be like, okay, so we're just learning this. Okay, fine, whatever. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've been a little more open. But like if you were like, well, this artist like Madison Cunningham plays an open tuning and this is one of her songs and you like that song and so you should learn how to play an open D, then I'm like, okay, I'm invested. Like I will obsess over that. But yeah, it's that like context is so helpful. That's why I think like if you're learning to play an instrument or you like writing songs, you should write songs with the 3 chords you know, and learn songs with the 3 chords you know, because like that's so exciting when you're like, wow, like it's not just like I'm not just acquiring knowledge unto like it's that knowing what it's unto, I think is helpful for people, and at least I know for me especially.
Yeah, no, it's real. The context. I'm extremely similar in a negative sense, like what you're saying is like, especially when it comes to like systems or, you know, even organizations or whatever.
Yeah,
like
sure.
my natural tendency is to challenge.
Sure,
like,
sure.
Like why are we doing this way, or why is this, and it can come across as like, as, you know, well, you're not on board, or you're whatever. Even like in a creative process, it's like, no, I it's not a negative thing at all. It's just I need context to understand why, and my contribution can actually be even greater when I have context.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's the knowing the why behind the what can be is really helpful, because then you know how to like channel whatever creative energy you're asked to channel into like the right thing, and you're like not competing against the idea, because you don't understand. Like if you don't understand the idea, then it's hard to think right about the idea, you know. Yeah, I think the collaboration space is something that is like a space I want to, especially with music, get into more. And I have done it to some certain degrees, and it's been easier to do that. I feel like in the past, like when you don't have your own little outlet, sometimes collaboration can be like, if you're going into a collaborative musical setting and you're like, this is my outlet to get all my ideas out, it's like, pause. It's not. Because if you've signed up to be in a collaborative setting, other people are going to want to contribute. And so learning how to create a very like generous environment for musical collaboration is like has been hard, but in like different contexts. But like I feel like when you can get into a place where it feels like really free and people are just kind of in their lanes and doing really well, it can be awesome. And I hope to do some projects in the future that have more collaboration. But yeah, getting people together is hard.
Yeah, totally. Now, it feels like, honestly, it feels like since COVID, we're like just now starting to get back into more of that kind of stuff. Like I know there's some like songwriters retreats and a few different things,
Sure.
and like that stuff's awesome. But like because of COVID, a lot of that stuff like
Yeah,
wasn't
totally.
really happening for a while, and so I don't know. It definitely feels like there's some things that are shifting a little bit collaboration wise. But I mean, do you feel like you've up to this point, has most of your stuff been just like you write it and and then maybe you have someone like Zane produce or mix it, or like what has been the process so far?
Yeah. So like I'll just use the EP as an example because it's the example. Like for Rocks in the Rain, the process was like, okay, I play multiple instruments. I can lay out an arrangement and demo everything and get stuff laid down. And so I would go through, toy around with an arrangement on an acoustic guitar or something and figure out where do I want the parts to land. And then go in and like record the acoustic, record like an acoustic and vocal part, like a rough thing, but that was to a metronome. So I could then go back in and like commit some parts to the song. So, rough track to metronome. Then I'd go back in, drop in an acoustic guitar, cleanly recorded with no vocal bleed or whatever. Go track vocals. The vocals are usually like still kind of rough, but mostly just to help me get my instrumentation kind of built around them. And then, adding drums, and then it's kind of the fun part. Like that's kind of the fun part for me is like once the arrangement's down, it's like then I get to like add colors to it. It's kind of like getting the outline drawn, and then you go, okay, now I can break out the paints. And so it's like drums, bass, and then like auxiliary instruments like other guitars or whatever. And that's kind of just all me like making instinctual moves and like playing producer in that space. And then once I feel like I'll bounce that track out and listen to it in my car, listen to it way too much on my way to and from work, and go, what else could go on here? What could happen here? Does this thing need to be? Does it need a guitar part here? Is that going to compete too much with the vocal? Is that part going to, let me try? And then it's just a lot of throwing paint at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think with this project where Zane came in as a producer was kind of like, I gave him a mix that I was like, I like to give, if I'm working with a mixer, like with Zane, and like in the future, I like to give you a vibe of like where the direction I'm going. I don't like, I feel pretty particular about that aspect. Like I know the direction. I'm not entirely the most detail oriented like mixer. Like I can mix, I know my strengths, and like being hyper detail oriented in a mix, it's like I could go there, but it's going to take me twice as long as somebody like Zane. And I'm also going to make myself crazy because the mixing process, for people who don't know, is you're like going through and trying to create a really cohesive sound between a lot of instruments. And so, you have all these different frequency ranges that can sometimes compete with each other. And, it's like, you have a kick drum and a bass, and they kind of take up a similar frequency range, and you don't want them to compete because one will disappear. So like when you hear a song with like a sick bass line and sick drum tones, somebody spent a really good amount of time like setting up the microphones right, and also like helping sonically differentiate the low end of a bass guitar and the low end of a kick drum to be cohesive. So there's a lot of details and a lot of skill that go into mixing really well. And I don't, that process isn't like the hyper fine detail stuff is like not really like where I'm very broad. I like broad strokes. Like I like to give you a thing that's like pretty good, but I know that with, you know, Zane's detail and like his experience, he can like bump it up a notch. So where he kind of came in was like cleaning up like anything that, you know, got bored with cleaning up or whatever, and then like adding some synthesizers and he did a little bit of drum production. He would like add a sample and mix that in with my drums that I recorded in the basement to like beef them up a little bit more. And then there was a few songs like Spiders where he actually like rearranged the drums, which, you know, like again, to explain that is like I gave him a drum track that was, you know, recorded a specific way, and then he kind of chopped it up, took some of the drums out during a verse, like simplified them in different areas. And then some of his producing role was just like helping give suggestions or like listening to the songs and going, hey, this part feels a little empty. Go track, like maybe track a Nashville sort of, or like a high strung kind of guitar, or like go track like some background vocals here. That would be a good idea. And that would be like, okay, cool. So that was where some of that collaboration was happening, was like just having another set of ears from somebody who knows how to listen to music from that perspective, be able to go like, hey, you've listened to the song 1,000 times, you've lost perspective, let me help you like hear where you might be like, you know, you might have a blind spot or something. Which is just, I think that's just good in general. Like if you're a person who's listening to this and you're like, I love making music, and I'm a very much like, I like to do all the parts, like I'm very DIY, like if you can track down or you have a friend that's like you trust, and you trust their taste, and like you trust their instinct, like getting another ear to go like, oh, hey, I feel like when you hit the chorus, it's like the energy dies down or whatever. Because every song has like has movements and dynamics. So there's like, you know, like maybe the chorus will get louder, or maybe it won't get louder, but there'll be another instrument that's added that brings energy or whatever. So working with Zane on that was like really awesome. I learned a lot from him, especially just thinking in terms of like, where's the payoff? Like, where's the payoff in a song? How do you like take somebody on a musical ride and like make sure like you're hosting them well, you know? And he's great. He's great with that, especially just like being in licensing and thinking about like moments and peaks and valleys in a song. He thinks a lot like that, and that was a lot of kind of, I walked away with working with him and being like, okay, like I want to think about those dynamics of like, where's the payoff for other people, not even necessarily just like what I get excited about, but like when a listener's listening to something, like when the second verse hits, like I want to give you a little bit more than the first verse because you're still here, you know. But yeah, that's kind of like the way that collaborative relationship was kind of like played out on this project.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you know, if you're, let's now say that you're, if we change lanes a little bit, and you're like now speaking to the person who's, you know, wanting to get into music, maybe they haven't been writing much yet, or they're like super early on.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
And whether they're older or younger, but like they're like, I think I want to explore writing and making music on my laptop, whatever it is. You know what I mean? What would you say to somebody who's like, you know, if they're wanting to like put something out and whatever, and grow in their music ability and all that kind of stuff? What are maybe some practical things, or, you know, other kinds of maybe less practical things
Sure.
that you would recommend for someone to like become a better writer?
Yeah, like in terms of like writing songs and like so I guess there's there's like sort of two sides. There's lyrics and then there's like music. Um, I think on the music side, it's find an instrument that's exciting to you. Learn 3 or 4 chords and start to understand the way that those chords like show up in other music. Um, Maybe learn a couple songs that aren't yours and just go like, oh, cool, like I get it. Um, and like start like actually just play with combining chords and like start getting a feeling for that vocabulary, because you'll play chords in certain sequences and you'll be like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, because you like if you're wanting to get into music and like writing music, like you've been listening to music, you know what sounds good and sounds right. It's just your fingers are learning a thing.
Yeah.
So it's like you're teaching your fingers how to execute what you already know sounds good and right. So like, and that part, like, I mean, if we're talking about learning an instrument, like all the way there, like that's just like, hey, be patient and like learn a few chords and just make sure you're giving yourself some space to like actually just like learn some fun, like have fun with it, and don't burn yourself out. But if we're like, I know how to play an instrument, I know how to play piano, I know how to play guitar or whatever, and I'm trying to write like songs, like I would say I would say challenge yourself to I would do 15-minute songwriting challenges. Like I would set yourself a timer, give yourself 20 minutes and sit down and go like, I'm going to write a song. And then like set back and ask yourself, what do I like about it? What don't I like about it? And then do it again. I would say definitely read Jeff Tweedy's book, How to Write One Song. That will give you some exercises of just writing in and of itself, like lyricism and like, I wish I had that book. So I had read that so much sooner. Like that book is incredible. It's a really easy read. It's such a great, like, it just challenges your preconceptions of like how to put words together. Write a lot and write about stuff that you see and like even some like, and just accept you're always going to be learning something. Like like right now I feel like I'm feeling really like challenged by Flannery O'Connor is like blowing my mind right now. I'm reading her book Wise Blood, which is just like this wild like book about like this southern, just miserable southern dude who's like trying to convince everybody he doesn't believe in God. And it's like the way that she describes people, like she disembodies people into like their parts. Like so somebody puts their hand on somebody's shoulder, she'll describe the hand as it rather than that person's hand. So now she's like created a new character out of just one part of a person. So it's like now the hand is its own thing. And then you start thinking about like, well, what is a hand like? And then you start describing it, and now you've like zoomed a microscope in on this one really small thing, and like you're looking at it for like its own inherent traits. And it's like, so like pay attention to like even the way that people write, like pay attention to the way that other people are describe things. Like you list, like, you know, if you, okay, the example of like, this is the only song that's coming to my head, like something like With or Without You by U2. It's like, that's a song that is, to me, it's a very broad stroke. It's like about heartbreak, and it's not like entirely, like, it's not super microscopic. But then you can take a song, like a person that's really good at this is the band Big Thief is so good at doing this. Like the woman who writes the music, I can't remember her name. I wish I could remember her name. She is so good at like writing on this microscopic level and going like, how did you describe like the shadows under somebody's eyes in such a way that like I know exactly what you're talking about, but you've honed in on this one thing, and it's like it's like blowing my mind. And it's like listen to songs about stories, like listen to songs with narrative. Taylor Swift writes a lot of narratively driven songs. It's like I was doing this thing, then this thing happened, and then like here's the chorus. This is the like the ethos of the whole piece, and then it's like, and now I'm telling you the other part of the story. I mean, depending on what you're into, like listen to old country western music, like lots of storytelling. Like, and play with those, like I'm gonna write a song about, like I'm gonna write a song about missing someone that you're in love with. That's a big thing. And like write about that maybe in big terms, and then play around with like, well, like let's get to the microscopic, like what do you miss about them? Is it like the fact that like their coffee table, when they left town, they left a coffee, unfinished coffee on your table when they left. It's like, and then but then keep going, describe what that looks like. And then maybe don't be so obvious, maybe just drop that one in there for the listener and let them put it together. There's just so much fun you can I think that's the other thing too, is like have fun, like just make sure that you keep some of that playfulness in there, because you're just gonna write bad. You're gonna write something bad. You're just gonna do it. Like you are, and accept it and move on. Like don't be like too worried about it. I don't know. And I think if you and listen to music. Just listen to tons of music. Listen to tons of different music, and listen to stuff that like, listen to old stuff, listen to new stuff, listen to things that are challenging. Like if something, one of the things I love about like, take a band like Radiohead or Wilco, or I don't know, I could name a dozen, but like there's always they have these songs where they'll like take you to the edge of like discomfort with like a tone or something, and then they switch into something more pleasant, and you're like, oh, like the juxtaposition of something like abrasive and something pleasant, like all of a sudden sets it's the like, oh, it was just rainy outside and now the sun is fully out and the sky is open. It's like those two things are so rich because you got to see the vast contrast between literally downpour hail this morning, like I couldn't see in front of me, and now it's just like clear, and it's like I feel like if I were to sit and think about the differences between a really cloudy, rainy, stormy day and a bright day out right now, I would have so much, because I just experienced these two very different things. Playing with that contrast, I think, is huge. But yeah, like it's like play with contrast in your writing and in what you listen to. Yeah, I don't know. There's some things.
Yeah, that's
There's
good.
some things to do.
That's great.
I could talk about that for so long. I love that stuff.
Well, let's maybe talk, like, I want to be wary of your time.
Yeah, sure.
So like I would love to talk a little bit on what we were talking about before we started recording.
Yeah, sure.
So like for context, we were talking a little bit about social media and kind of just the age we're in, where everybody is making content. It feels like you kind of have to if you want to build something, but also because of the gift of free distribution and all those things, as an artist, as any kind of creative, really, to be able to share your work with thousands of people at any moment, But there's some kind of, negative things that come along with that. But, what have you seen, with this EP? I've noticed, like, you've been intentional to do a couple like short form videos about like behind the scenes and the process and some stuff with Zane in the studio and some different things. And And, you know, just over your course of, you know, the last however many years of making music, how has like social media played a role in it?
Mm-hmm.
And even like, what kind of pressures do you feel to be on it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of pressure to be on it because it's where people are. It's like the public square. It's like, you know, if you think about a person who posts a video, even if like 20 people, like imagine 20 people in this apartment. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So I think like I do feel pressure to be on it. And I think like part of dealing with that is just knowing. I'll put it this way, like I feel like understanding that social media serves a purpose and like letting it do that and like kind of letting it stay in its place. Like I don't mean that like I mean that with intention.
Mm-hmm.
Like for this project, for this EP, I had a moment where I was like I really really wanted to start working on the next stuff and I was trying to start writing new stuff and I was trying to make content to promote this EP. And then I kind of had a moment where I was like, you know, I need to start thinking about this a little bit more seasonally. Like right now I'm in a time where I need to like promote this project because I worked really hard on it and I want people to know about it. So like I'm going to just let myself work on content. And that massively freed up a lot of energy and just like mental turmoil about like the fear of like, am I never going to write another song again? Because I'm putting so much creative energy into like setting up cameras and like, you know, filming stuff. And but it took a weight off me to go like now's my time to make content. That's what I'm focused on. And at some point like I will like sort of pedal down on like how much energy I'm putting that, or just like the type of energy I'm putting into it. You know what I mean? I think that's the cool thing with content is that like there's so many different vehicles in which you can like kind of, and I don't mean like platforms, I just mean like in styles and approaches. Like there's so many different styles and approaches you can take to like creating short form content. I speak specifically about short form content because I feel like that's the big one right now.
Yeah.
People are learning how to like create that. So like, for me, like thinking about this EP was like, well, I don't want to just put out songs of me put out videos of me playing the songs. But that's awesome because I get to play them live and I get to have a little bit more of this like tangible experience with the music where people actually can hear me playing them live. So that's fun. But I don't want to just do that because like I can only play these 4 songs so many times before. I don't want to burn anybody out on them. I want them to burn themselves out on it. I don't want to do that for them. But I also don't want to just stop talking about it because it feels like a little bit irresponsible. So the like behind the scenes thing was like, I'm going to sit down with Zane and we filmed like 22 minutes. So I'm going to just pull clips and stuff from that for the next couple weeks and just have a variety of like, oh, you can listen to these other parts of the song dissected. I'm going to sit down with another friend and like kind of talk through the process of the EP and again pull clips from that. I think just like from what I've learned from my job at JHS, like is like if you can find ways to like work sort of like a funnel down sort of method where it's like what you're doing, you're able to like film this, have this piece of long form content that then you can like trickle down into short form content for months or whatever, and then you know by the time you're filming the next interview, you've got a variety of whatever and stuff you can call back to, and that's incredible. I think thinking about things in those terms are helpful. I think too, like having just a few go-tos, and also not underestimating like some people, the things that you think are kind of boring about your craft or whatever you do. There's probably a lot of people that are interested in it, like. You know, like, hey, like, why do you own that guitar? Well, just tell somebody about it for like 30 seconds. Like, that's fun. And they'll appreciate it. Or like, I just think it's easy to underestimate like the stuff you know about, you know, and go like, well, that's kind of boring. And it's like, you don't know that. Try it. Try telling somebody about like, you know, I don't know, the way that you put the mics on the drums, or like, I don't know, like what books you like to read before going in the studio. Just like think a little bit. You can think more microscopic. I always like to think like we make a lot of video content at work, and I like to try to think about things in 3 categories. There's like big budget, medium budget, small budget. And budget is not dollar signs, it's time. It could mean actual money or assets or whatever. But if you think about it in time, more specifically, because we don't have a lot of money to make content in our spare time. So there's the big budget idea, which is like 3 cameras. We're going to get a freaking, like, you know, you were like, I want to, like, maybe we'll do behind the, like, pre-podcast video where I've got like a gimbal and we're walking around. And like, that's a big budget idea, because that means you got to have some manpower to film that. You got to have like that's more to edit.
Right.
And then it's like, well, what's the medium version? Like, let's just run with this idea. So like the medium version of that idea is set up a still camera in your kitchen that as at a good angle, and just kind of like roll it with some audio gear, right? There's a medium budget idea. Then the small budget idea is just record a voice memo of y'all's conversation beforehand, and then maybe like have a segment or something that's like behind the scene or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think like thinking about things in those terms, because some ideas will be worth the big budget one, and some of them won't be. And I think you are the only person that knows. You're the only person that knows, because it's like, it's a whole like perfect is the enemy of good thing. And it's like, don't like sacrifice doing like making content to promote your thing or whatever. I mean, I think Zane talked a lot about content being a byproduct of like the thing, which I think is also extremely important. I just think that there's a lot of byproduct, and it's like learning about what those things are and learning to recognize them as byproduct. Because it's like, he did the sawdust analogy, which is like, no one was thinking that was a viable byproduct, but it's like, what's something that like is just a part of your process that you're doing here? Like, you know, I mean, a picture of that Zoom recorder on the floor could be like so valuable to somebody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, because there's probably some person who goes to your thing and they're like, that guy's doing podcasts. Oh, they look really cool and they sound really good. What there's always the like, what camera are you using, bro? Like, what mics are you using, bro? That's like a real easy win with people.
It's helpful.
And I don't mean that in like a trivial way. It's just actually helpful. So I think like trying to like figure out for yourself what's a big budget idea, and keeping in mind that mostly will be time. Like, that's probably mostly about time rather than money. Because like, if you're like me and you have 3 kids and you have a full-time job and you're also trying to make content around music that you're spending time making, like, you have to know how to like do it well sustainably. Like we talked about that a little bit before. This was just like, man, how do you do it and stay consistent without burning out? And it's like, yes. Like the answer is yes. That is what you should pursue. Like it, and also, I will just to tack this onto like the content thing, like, just like let yourself make what you can make and just do it consistently, even if it's like sort of few and far between, and let yourself work that muscle. Because like the difference between you and somebody else is like, you know, don't burn hard and fast, like burn just consistently, and
Yeah.
be really okay with being able to accept the fact that you have, you know, whatever, you have kids, a job, everything else going on, and like let there be times where you're just like, yeah, like this is what I can do, but I am doing it, you know. Because you know, you never know. Like there could be that one conversation, like we said earlier, was like that one could blow up, and you want to be in a place where you've worked the muscle enough to know how to properly care for that opportunity, you know. Because
Yeah.
opportunities I think are there for people who are prepared, you know, and just have put in the time.
Yeah, it's interesting because like it can be applied to like any creative discipline.
Yeah.
I think it's easiest to like measure like blowing up in the sense of like social media metrics, because like it can, large numbers can mean success.
Sure,
it
totally.
can, like it could mean success monetarily, it could mean success in recognition
Sure.
or whatever. But yeah, I think that's like the really important part that I'm trying to challenge myself in thinking all the time. And my encouragement to others would be like, if you're wanting to make a podcast or whatever it is, but like, let's just use the podcast as an
Sure.
example. Like if you think about like, who are the craziest people you could have a conversation with? Like, and you know, like I have a list of people who are like my dream, whatever.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
And it's like, am I producing them at the level and being really good at being a conversationalist and all the thing, and promoting them like the way that I should responsibly, in a way that if that conversation happened, it's not like I'd have to be like, okay, now I have to get professional. It's like, you know what I mean?
Right, totally, yeah.
Like, how do you do it now as
No.
if you're having those conversations?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And if you're like a musician and a songwriter, it's like, know how to play your songs. Like, don't wait to learn how to play your songs when you're asked to play a gig. Like that's one of those things where it's like the time and the energy just into like learning and getting better at the craft itself, regardless of where your skill level is. Like one of the things I've learned that's been extremely helpful to me, and this seems like but like me just spending time practicing my songs means, one, I can jump in front of a mic and turn a camera on and film myself singing one of my songs in way less time if I'm actually just prepared and well practiced. Two, if, you know, my wildest fantasy of like, I randomly am at Paul McCartney's house for some reason, and he's like, well, what kind of music do you play? And he's like, play one of your songs, which is, you know, like the most ridiculous thing ever. But it's like, I want to not be in
Would you be ready for
Would
it?
I be
Yeah.
ready for that? And
Yeah.
like, you know, and it's like, what is that answer? And it's like learning, like that's a superpower. Like that's a superpower to be like I know my songs and I can play them on an acoustic guitar and a piano for you right now because I've practiced them. And like they weren't just this thing that I made and then I walked away from. It's like I continue to know how to do them. I mean, it's similar like with this world, like with podcast filmmaking world. Like the thing I've learned the most about being in such a DIY space, like at JHS with the video content that we do, like it's for a company, but it's still very DIY because it's not like we're not a production company.
Right.
We're a pedal company. We haven't even hardly given context to JHS, but but like we're a guitar pedal company that makes content. So we're still very DIY in the way that we do stuff. But the thing I've learned from that is how to be like really scrappy. Like I know how to set up, like when I filmed that stuff with Zane on like the behind the scenes stuff, that took me like 10 minutes to set up because I knew just from like having to be like run and gun, like how to make that happen. I knew like how to set the camera up. I knew how to set it to a wide angle so I could crop it vertically for short form. I knew that like I needed good audio and like a decent camera angle, and just one because I'm gonna chop it in half and put it on social media. And then it was like I needed to be able to hear the songs, and like being able to go like I know how to set that up in like 30 seconds or whatever, like 10 minutes is like huge, because that only took us 20 minutes, but that's like probably 5 or 6 pieces of content that I can post over time. And so it's like that is extremely, I mean, it takes time to like get to the point where you're like, I can just run and gun and set something like that up really quick. But again, similarly with the songwriting thing, it's like, dude, know how to play your songs. Because what if you get asked to open for somebody tomorrow and you're like, oh shoot, you know what I mean? Like, because it could happen, and it's just like being prepared, and also being able to sit down in front of a camera and play a song all the way through is not easy. But man, if you can do that, like that's a lot of content. Most songs have a verse, a chorus. So that's one piece of content, and they have a second verse and a chorus. That's another piece of content. And sometimes they have a bridge or a middle eight or something. There's another piece of content. And it's like, cool, there's like 3 viable pieces of content from a song that I made that I can like, if I've practiced enough, I can pull that off pretty quickly. So yeah.
And that's just from maybe sitting down and singing the song. That's not all the other creative renditions you could do of it.
Sure.
And I think part of it too is like behind the scenes has been a thing in the movie industry for a reason.
Yeah.
Like people like seeing how things are made and why those decisions were made and why people think the way they think when they're making a decision or make that choice. And with social media, we just get the opportunity to do that at any time.
Yeah.
Like
no,
just
totally.
share like, and I think part of it too is like also, like you said, realizing that people do care. That is still valuable to somebody.
Yeah.
Probably more than you think.
Way more than you think. Yeah. I mean, just think about like, okay, songwriter person who's listening to this. Like, what do you wish your favorite artist would post on social media about the process or whatever? And then like do that.
Yeah.
'Cause like that could be super helpful to somebody. And like you underestimate that, but like, you know, if I don't know, like anytime Kevin Parker from Tame Impala posts anything on YouTube where he's in a studio, well, if he posts anything on YouTube, I'm always watching it. But like if he posts something where he's in a studio, especially, I am just like, oh my gosh, a peek behind the curtain. And I know what behind the curtain looks like because I have my own behind the curtain, but I want to know what behind his curtain looks like, because maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there that I'm not thinking about that could like drastically change the way I do. I'm watching the quarterbacks documentary, and one of the guys was talking about how he reads like people's sports biographies and sports like books, like professionals who are writing their own books about their craft. He's like, as a quarterback, I read them so much differently than when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was like, oh man, I love this guy. But now he's like, I'm looking at it through the eyes of like a peer, and like, I'm going like, well, what is his exercise regimen like? Because like I have my own and it's working, but like maybe there's an unlock somewhere in this other person's process. And and recognizing that like maybe you could be that for somebody else. And it's a little bit audacious to be like, I hold within me knowledge that is impossible to find on the internet except for from me. And the truth is that that's true. Like the internet, there's information all over the place. But if somebody who's following me is giving me the time of day and giving my music the time of day to go like, I'm going to listen to this and consume it. Like that means like what I have to say to some degree matters to them. So if I'm like, yeah, I recorded my vocal on this microphone with this vocal chain, like that might be some unlock that like helps them get really excited about making their EP. And that's just kind of like a cool way to, and that content, like may only be for a few hundred people, but those people are just going to keep showing up to the thing that you're making because you've invested in them and you've given them something that's like more than just, hey, listen to my thing.
Yeah.
Just imagine just imagine whatever field you're in, if this person gave me the behind the scenes look and they said this, that would mean so much to me. What am I doing, and what unlock do I have that it's so easy.
Yeah.
It's like right there.
And it can feel maybe daunting or like, why would I share that, or why would I,
Sure.
whatever. But even as I think, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about like, okay, in the podcast stuff, like what value are you adding other than just releasing the thing?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
sure, you release an EP. It's like, cool. I released an episode. Hey, everyone, this episode's live. You know what I mean? Like I do this every week. And so I'm been thinking about like, what else can I say that before they listen to it, they can understand that it's for them.
Right.
But also, like, what other ways can you go about just saying that, how can you make it even more about the audience and less about the saying that your thing is available?
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there's like some of that's like real practical, and it's like just make the onboarding easy for people. Like think about the way that they get to the thing. At least make that easy. Mm-hmm. There's I've seen a lot of like where people will put a thing out and it's like, bro, I had to click 2 links or like I had to click and I didn't know what I was getting in. I mean, I've canceled purchases because of stuff like that. I think I think even as a content creator, it's like if you're thinking about like what you're making and like what it's communicating and just make sure you're being a good communicator because like people's attention spans, blah, blah, are getting shorter, blah, blah. And like, yes, that's true. But people have always wanted to be communicated with well. Yeah. Like that's never changed. Like there's good communication, bad communication, like just communicate well and like ask yourself and give the video a few watch throughs, have your husband or wife watch through it and go like, does that feel clear? Like, and then the thing is you're going to post it and you're like, I could have cut that one little part out. I probably could have cut that one part out. And then you just know for next time. And it's just, again, to go like all the way back to the beginning, it's like whether you're making a piece of content to promote the content, you are doing the act of creating and sharing. And through that like exchange, if you like let yourself and you don't get like don't let yourself get bummed out when you post something and you are like, I should have cut that bit out. Like you just learned how to make a better video. That's all that happened. Like it's not a crisis. That's all that happened. You just learned how to make a better video or a better song or whatever. So yeah, I just, there's just so much to like learn from that like exchange that I think like if the exchange itself is scaring you, just like have faith that like at the very least you will learn something that will make the next time even better.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I think that's a great place to end actually. Yeah. We've kind of come full circle at this point. So good. Thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for talking, about your music and why you do it. And you've given some really practical stuff. You've given some behind the scenes of, how you made the things that you've made recently. And I think people are going to be really interested in it. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. And we will definitely do this again.
Sweet.
Okay, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, bro.
Yeah, dude.